Yes, we did. I got new headphones
Okay.
last night from my local bodega when I get back.
Mhm.
Um, yes, so because I had worried that I'd ruined the beeper somehow because I thought, oh, you know what will be fun? I will take it on this expedition to Iowa with me, and on my travel day back, I will do it. And so I thought I would do it from the morning in terms of like getting in the cab and like going through security at the airport and like all these sorts of things. And then obviously I take it out of my ear to go through security and put it through the scanner. And so that's after that it stopped working. And I was like, have I ruined it with some sort of X-ray machine? But no, it was just the headset.
So it's just the headphones. The headphones have actually they're inexpensive headphones, but they've been pretty durable lately. You're the first one to break one in a while. But the beepers have been pretty durable too. I shouldn't say that because
Yeah. Anyway,
don't want
so that's
don't
my
want to
fault.
jinx them.
But I fixed it, and so I did my beeps this morning, which is actually a new thing because every other time that we've met, I did them the day before. So I literally just got home about 10 minutes ago and had done them this morning, and have been out and about. So as I said to you, like I'm conscious of trying to keep this really interesting for all of us and explore different versions of my inner experience in terms of making sure that I'm not just doing it when it's like really easy, i.e., like at home doing jobs. Like we've had a few versions of that. That's fine. I'm really keen to try and do the sampling when I'm really social now. So I wore it out for coffee and things with my friend this morning. And then I think next time I'd really love to do it, like out for dinner and in loud, busy environments and just see if there's similarities, differences, whatever. So that's where I'm at with it.
Well, I think that's good. I think the more different places, the better. And I we could speculate about what we would find, but better we should do it, and won't have to speculate.
Yes. Okay, so without further ado, would you like me to get onto it, or do you have anything else to add?
Let's
I'm
let's get into it from
I'm
my
ready. And do we want to alternate you me you me you me?
perspective. Yeah, let's
Julian?
do that. So I guess I could take the first beep.
Okay.
So what was in your experience, if anything, for the first beep?
Um, okay, so it was 8:57 this morning, and I've written down. I was looking in the mirror, no distinct thoughts per se, not necessarily autopilot. Um, Inner experience, and I'm expecting you're going to challenge me on this. Inner experience was an overall vibe or state, like happiness. There was music playing, which I feel like consumes my brain, but there was no distinct thought to note.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no distinct thought, but you say not quite autopilot.
Mhm.
Um, can you describe more what was there?
So it interrupted me. The beep went off as I was looking in a full length mirror. Like I just got dressed and stuff. And I remember I'd sort of like done this with my hair, but I remember noting like it wasn't as if the reason I think I put not necessarily autopilot or no distinct thought was like I wasn't consciously aware of the fact that I had just touched my hair when it went off.
Mhm.
I wasn't looking at myself in the mirror and analyzing my outfit or anything. Um, I wasn't thinking about whatever I was going to do next. I can't even remember what I did next. I remember there was music playing over my speakers, and at risk of contextualizing too much, I when music is playing, that often completely consumes my brain. So I feel like, um, yeah, there wasn't when the beep went off. I was in that state.
Was was the music playing experienced at this moment, or was it like looking back you saw that there was music playing?
Hmm. I think it was experienced at the moment, um, but in a way of it being like um, peripheral. But there was an awareness of the music for sure, but it wasn't completely. drowning out the rest of my there was an awareness, but without it being the core focus of my awareness, if that maybe makes any sense.
Okay. So it was peripheral. It was not the core focus. Um, was there any particular aspect of the music, like I don't know, the voice, the this, the that, or no?
Uh,
The
no,
music was
I would just say like uh, the way I would link it to my awareness is just the way it was making me feel, um, which is I think why I've written like inner experience was an overall vibe or state, and then I've got happiness. I think that's directly linked to the music that was playing.
all right. So happiness, this vibe or state. Um, is there more detail you could give about that, or you don't remember?
Yeah. So, and this is where I've tried to, I feel like, articulate this previously, and where it gets a little challenging, but where I'm trying to push myself on this a bit more. Where in an experience, when the beep goes off, it's not a tangible thing like, oh, I was thinking this thing or I was visualizing this thing. My version of that, when the beep goes off, is this like overall state is my inner experience. And on this occasion, that state, that feeling, that vibe was this calm and happiness. Um, and that's not I think maybe really, really early days when we started doing this, I
Mm.
sort of tried to articulate that, and we worried that I was perhaps adding too much context and thinking like that was my general mood for the day. I don't. That's not what I'm trying to articulate here. When
Mm-hmm.
this beep went off, I had the overwhelming takeaway of my inner experience was that vibe and that feeling, that state of being, rather than a particular thought or whatever. It was just that,
Yeah,
state of being. And
because
I've
I
got
remember.
that was kind of happy, light, positive.
Yeah, I remember a similar beep where you had a relaxed, positive light feeling you
Yeah.
described there. And then, yeah, I asked if it was that feeling or just the absence of negative feelings or the absence of thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you weren't quite sure about it.
Yeah. So I don't
So,
think this is an absence of thought. Like this was the thing.
yeah.
That was my inner experience. That's different to sometimes when I've felt an absence of thought, uh, or a thought or an autopilot. I don't think this fits in any of those things. There is an experience there, and it is um, that feeling almost.
Yeah. So I'm curious, why do you say this feeling almost? Or
Because
is
I
it just something you said?
because I feel like feeling is not the right word to use. Because and and I need to like investigate my vocab more for this, because the most appropriate word so far feels like vibe, which feels very millennial and Gen Z. But I think that sort of encapsulates what I'm trying to describe. Of like it's a feeling, but not in the way of like it's more holistic than I think feeling perhaps says, because it's that state of being um, like subconscious but felt thing, if
Hmm.
this is making any sense.
So subconscious but felt. Um, so okay, let me try to think of the next avenue for questioning. So happy, light, positive. So is there other ways to describe this feeling? Does it have any physical sensation or not, or you can't remember?
No, I don't recall noting anything physically. Like as I said, I'd run my hand through my hair,
Mhm.
but I didn't necessarily notice that physical
Mhm.
action or like tactile, you know, thing.
Yeah. And I'm curious about when you said subconscious but felt.
Hmm.
I don't want to do what Russ said not to do, just get too hung up on words.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know. Is there something behind that too? Like that part of this is maybe subconscious, but part of it is experienced, or that.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get at there is that like it's the kind of, I think, is a bit of an oxymoron in that like there's an awareness, but at the same time there's not. Like it's felt, and I know that like that's the experience that I'm having or the state of being that I'm in, but it's not like uh it's not like that meta sense of where I'm like super aware when I'm living and feeling that's the thing. But on reflection, when I'm asked to articulate what my inner experience was when that beep went off, well, then I can think, well, it was this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying words and not adding much there.
But so you mean that it's not like at that moment you're self-consciously thinking, "Oh, I am happy right now." It's not that. It's more just
A lived thing.
this feeling. And is is all these words you've used? I think calm, happy, positive, light.
Hmm.
Is it all as one kind of thing, or is it maybe separate aspects of one feeling, or separate feelings? Or-
No, one thing, and they're just words that I'm using to try and describe that overall state of being.
Okay, yeah. And were any of them that you used more than metaphorical, or was it all, or does that not make much sense to you?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, then I think I'll drop that question. Was there anything else in experience?
Um, no, I don't think so. There was I as we've found on previous weeks, sometimes it's easier for me to describe like what wasn't there and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's yeah, there are some notable distinctions there for me with this one, like comparatively, as I said earlier, in terms of like I wasn't caught mid action and therefore feeling
Mhm.
like I was in autopilot, like I was kind of caught in this in between thing where like I wasn't mid something
Mhm.
and I wasn't mid like actual thought. I was just present, and that those words that I've used to describe that presence are sort of what was happening.
Okay, so I have that at 8:57. You're looking in a full-length mirror. The actual looking isn't so experienced. You're listening to music, and if that's experience, that's more in the periphery
Hmm.
and more about how it's affecting your mood.
Hmm.
But what's definitely present is this mood, feeling, vibe of
Hmm.
happy, positive lightness.
Hmm.
But that doesn't have a specific location or anything like that. But it is experience.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't have any more questions, Russ.
So I'm pretty good with that, I think. But I would like to push a little bit on the distinction between this vibe, mood, whatever, and that it doesn't seem to be what you would call a feeling. This is somewhat less than or different from
Hmm.
a feeling. Is there
Hmm.
anything more to say about that?
Yeah, perhaps that it is kind of in the same way that I'm saying that the music was peripheral. I think a distinction between how I'm describing that state of being and being reluctant to use the word feeling is because feeling feels like something that would be more intensely present, whereas this feels like a layer below that. It's this. And so I would say, like, if I'm angry, that perhaps feels more intense. Or if I feel like definitely happy, that feels like a more intense thing. And that's when I would use feeling. Whereas this feels like a layer below that because it's sort of below the surface and it's just an overall sort of mood vibe. Hmm.
Okay. And then I think I'm good. Number 2.
Okay.
And I would say, by the way, feelings are, I think, the hardest thing when they're clear, and when they're sort of diffuse, as this seems to be, then that's one notch harder.
Yep. Thanks. I feel like I'm talking a lot of gibberish. So thanks for
It's tough.
saying a lot. Oh yeah.
I used to think, by the way, it was my fault that I just didn't know how to talk about feelings, but I don't think that's really true. I think it's just hard.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay. Next one I've got going off at 9:45 a.m. And I was about to head out the door. Same thing, which I was embarrassed about when this went off because I was looking in the mirror. I swear I'm not always looking in a mirror. But I was about to head out the door, so I was looking in the mirror. And I touched my hair again, but nothing tangible going on inside is what I wrote down. So on this occasion, there was a slight difference in sort of like being mid-action in terms of like I sort of like looked in the mirror and just like, one last look or whatever before I genuinely headed out the door. For comparison, the earlier beep, I was really, trying to describe that state of being and that sort of feeling and whatever. I haven't tried to describe that here. Here, I'd go back to that category of more like nothingness and a sort of emptiness inside my mind.
And so the contrast between this and the previous beep, would you say, as context, you were sort of happy at this beep, but that was not in your experience?
At this one?
Yes.
Yeah, I think my mood was definitely the same as the earlier beep, but I was not aware of that state of being on this occasion. Yeah.
That's exactly the question that I was asking. So the mood seems sort of the same, but I'm not experiencing it now. And on the previous beep, I was somehow experiencing it as a mood diffusity or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at this time, even though the rest of the beep is sort of similar, I'm not experiencing. I'm not experiencing that.
Yeah, definitely. This one felt just more, just sort of just nothing. But the other one, there was definitely an overwhelming feeling, vibe thing. Yeah.
Okay. Then I got to go back and ask about, by overwhelming, do you mean really strong, even though not specified, or do you mean just by overwhelming, sort of throughout?
Overwhelming as in present, because I think given it's a vibe and this language, this is so ridiculous, but like that distinction where I'm reluctant to use the word feelings, like, and that's got an intensity. When I'm describing this like overwhelming vibe that I'm feeling and that state of being to the point where I jotted it down and noted it, I still think like I like when you use the word diffused there, like there's still almost like there's like a grayscale over that. So I'm feeling that I'm present, but whatever, but it's not like it's not the forefront of my brain, it's not distractingly present. It's not super strong like that.
Okay.
Then in this beep, which I'm describing now, it's not even present, even though in noting that, I'd like probably argue from a meta level that my mood was exactly the same as the previous beep. However, I haven't been aware of that it hasn't been in my inner experience on this occasion.
Okay. Then I think I'm good.
I'm pretty good. I'm wondering if it's. Do you think it's a full nothing or a little tiny smidge of something, or again, like don't want to say or can't tell?
Don't know, but I think if I was going to lob something up, I would say like a full nothing, and not not an autopilot, which we've established previously. That feels like a different thing, but this felt, yeah, like empty.
Okay, I'm good too.
Okay.
Number 3.
Next one was at 10:21, and I was out for coffee with a friend at this point. So we were sitting in a cafe, and I had it in. So when I got there, I had to explain to her this is going to stay in, ignore it. And this was really interesting because this went off mid conversation, which is what I was really hoping for. So I've written, I was mid conversation and deep listening to Millie. There's no thought, just full attention. So she was speaking, the beep went off, and I almost found it challenging to write down what my inner experience was at that point because it just was locked in.
So full attention. Was that to any specific thing she said, or just more
On this
general about
on
attention?
this one, I haven't written down specifically what she said at that moment, but I was I had a singularity of awareness, presence, whatever, in terms of just being consumed by whatever it was she was saying. Again, I haven't written that down, but I remember that when the beep went off, I was absolutely consumed by whatever it was she was saying.
Do you think if you had written down a particular thing, do you think it would give us insight into the experience, or do you think that it wouldn't have mattered the exact content?
No, yeah, it wouldn't have mattered because without at risk of adding too much context, that's me all the time. There's a singularity of thought whenever I'm having a conversation with someone. So, like how somebody else might notice flower behind them or think of that other thing they have to do or whatever. Like Millie was speaking and I'm listening, and that's my experience at that moment, and it always is. So it's not like she was saying something that was so pertinent that meant everything else. Like I don't think the content is relevant here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not that like being engaged, being attentive was maybe a broader part of this conversation, like a broader part of this experience with your friend, and that at this exact moment before the beep, maybe something was something else, or what do you think?
So again, if I think back to it, like, and I don't know whether this is helpful or less helpful for you, but I find it helpful to rule things out. So like I wasn't aware of other sounds in the cafe, even though it was probably busy, or like it was definitely busy, but like I wasn't aware of, noises of coffee being made or traffic outside or anything. I was, I wasn't, I have no idea what I was doing with my hands at the time. I wasn't feeling cold, hot. There was probably music playing. I didn't notice it. Like the only thing that I've described as my inner experience is being consumed by what she was saying. So listening to her and being fully attentive. And I guess to take that perhaps a step further, that then is really closely linked with like a kind of emptiness in my brain, in the sense that my whole inner experience is just focused on sucking in that. So there's no there's no awareness of my state of being, there's no awareness of whether I'm hot or cold, all these things. It's just fully locked in and like listening.
So I'm curious, because you have this consuming quality of being attentive.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned emptiness. is it more than the other, or could it maybe be both at the same time? Like the emptiness is how this consuming thing happens, or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So I use emptiness there in a way of like trying to describe sort of the vessel that I become in order to intake that information. So like I guess the way I'm using emptiness there is to say that I'm not consciously aware of anything else.
hmm
And I'm just live listening to what she's saying. So to, use that computer term again, like processing, but that's sort of the what I'm doing. Um,
is there, okay, so it's nothing else, but it is, you are experiencing this attention, this focus on what she's saying. Are there other ways you could describe this kind of attention, focus, concentration part?
yeah, it's really challenging because um it's kind of like observational, reactive, like it's not like now I'm trying to think about whether, like, okay, how does listening to this conversation differ from me doing the vacuuming?
hmm
I'm not necessarily sure it does differ,
Okay.
even though what I'm engaged in is so entirely different. I'm listening to Millie tell me a story. Inner experience wise, I think it's kind of a similar thing of there's nothing that I'm like super aware of. I'm just like wholeheartedly listening.
hmm So that's very interesting to me because the vacuuming one, just from the descriptions before, it seemed like it was much less present, much more autopilot.
Mm.
And here from the descriptions, it seemed like it would be more present, but
Yeah, but present as in how? Because my version of present, like when I'm vacuuming, yeah, I'm on autopilot, but my version of autopilot is not like then my brain just disappears into some universe. Like I'm physically present and my inner experience, my brain is like is it's like present slash not present as is normal. Like I think that's just my base of like this quietness and this nothingness. And I feel like the link there with, how I've described that with autopilot is like I'm doing a thing where it's like factually correct that I'm doing a thing, I'm vacuuming, or in this instance, like it's factually correct that I'm doing a thing, and by that thing I mean listening to my friend.
mhm.
But there's nothing that I can really put my finger on that differentiates that experience for me. I don't think.
Okay. So we had the vacuum. We also had I don't know if you remember now, maybe like it's just more in my head because I was doing the sample descriptions, but this sample where you were emailing someone,
Mm.
it was still pretty autopilot, but you said maybe a little something more concentration because it was emailing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know between. So you say this sample with the conversation that we're looking at now is is it could be pretty similar to the vacuum experience. Is
Yeah, so I feel like now that you've reminded me of that one, then again, we've come to those degrees of nothingness, right? This probably fits in with that sort of emailing one. But it's really tricky because what I'm trying to do is remove my uh, remove the link between like what I know to be like sort of physically true in the sense that like I'm listening, therefore I must be like, like trying to just really focus in on
Mm.
at that exact moment before the beep went off. Does that feel the same as when a beep goes off when I'm mid writing an email? Yes, it does. It does. It's
Okay.
exactly the same if it's when a beep goes like if the beep goes off mid email and I wasn't thinking ahead of what to write or whatever, which we've had previously of, oh, it just went off and it interrupted me and I wasn't consciously aware of like the sentence I was about to write or like whatever. This feels exactly the same as that.
Interesting. Well, I think there are a few more questions to ask about this, but I'm curious what Russ, what's on Russ's mind.
So let me. What I'm understanding basically is your friend's talking and you're absorbed in what she's saying, and that's basically it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that the distinction that we're worried about here is to whether this absorption in conversation has some active listening, reaching out, whatever. And I'm gathering that the answer to that is no.
Mm-hmm.
That she's talking and I'm absorbed in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not too different from I'm vacuuming and I'm absorbed in the vacuuming.
Mm.
It's different in that my friend is talking and that's, it's a different context and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I'm absorbed in it, and there's no meta stuff about it. There's
Mm-hmm.
no. I'm noticing that I'm absorbed. I just she's talking. I'm soaking it up. There's nothing else going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
It's that simple.
Sounds good to me. And the fact that we're not talking about exactly what she was saying,
Mm-hmm.
I think probably indicates that I'm not. It's not that I'm just hearing the words that she's saying. It's that I am soaking up this whatever it is that she's given out. I'm soaking up or whatever, which is partly words and partly some other
Yeah.
linguistic stuff.
Like I think the thing that I'm trying to make clear there, which I think you've got, is I'm not listening to what she's saying and then, like third layering on that of like, oh, that's an interesting thing that happened to me one time. Like there's not that sort of process going on in my head while she's talking. None of that. It's just she's talking and I'm listening. There's no other layer.
Then I think I'm good.
I think I understand. I'm still quite curious. I feel like we ended up in a similar place, but had very different ways of getting there. Like the vacuuming experience
Mm,
was more autopilot, and here we talk more about like absorption or being consumed,
mm-hmm,
um, but still end up that a lot of it is maybe something that you're not directly conscious of or directly focusing on.
mm-hmm.
And I'm still curious about why the descriptions are in a way very similar and also so different.
Yeah, I think my first thought to that is just perhaps to do with me trying to get better at describing or like whatever. I would say that more than anything of I would lean towards me trying to articulate things more accurately or in a way
Mhm.
that feels better to me more so than like if it's a really important distinction between the activities. I think that
Mhm.
I'd lean towards it's just me getting better at or trying new language or whatever to articulate the
Mhm.
thing.
Because, yeah, I think I also need to just get better at understanding it because it seems like almost paradoxical that you could be very absorbed but still,
but also not.
like, yeah, also not. Also in consciousness, there's not that much. Um, yeah.
So on that, then I would say how it feels for me is the like if it's the absorbed or not, it's actually kinder than not. But that's what's like that's my version of like how I was saying before with the mood and the state of being and then how a feeling feels really intense. So
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm doing something, um, then like to be really absorbed by it feels like a really intense thing. But to be like doing it and on autopilot and like consumed by it, but it's still this it lacks that intensity though.
Mm-hmm.
I know none of this makes any sense because we've gotten to a layer where this is so all of this today feels the most accurate version of my inner experience. So like anything that's not clear, definitely keep asking questions about because this feels like the closest we've gotten to it.
Yeah, I think maybe maybe other beeps will like add more to being able to see these distinctions.
Mm-hmm. Um,
So
I'm
I'm
looking,
ready to go forward to number
Okay.
4.
I'm looking at them and I'm not sure they will, Julian. So
Okay.
the next one I've got went off at 11 a.m. and I was mid conversation with Millie again. And I've written, we were talking about dating in New York, and I was very present in the conversation. That's it. That's all I wrote.
And is present in the conversation the same experience as the absorption, whatever we were talking about last time? Is this the same deal?
Yeah. Absorb, fully attentive, no other thoughts, a singularity of absorption.
And so the experience on the fourth beep and the experience on the third beep seem like pretty much are exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. In this beep, you gave us the content. You said we're talking about dating in New York. In the previous beep, you didn't. Is that an artifact of the descriptive process, or is there something different that leads you to be able to say about this one? It's about this content, and about that one, I don't even have any content.
Good question. Let me think. Yeah, I don't know. Part of me wants to speculate that this conversation about dating in New York elicited more emotional responses in me, and therefore but I'm getting dangerously speculative there, I reckon.
So let me put into words what I understand about this beep, and that is my friend Millie is talking. I'm soaking it up. I'm absorbed in it. And this is not an active process. This is not a it's not a hugely I'm being consumed by. It is a I'm absorbed in what she's saying. There's nothing else going on, and
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think I'm good.
But this absorbing is still experienced.
Well, experienced in the way that that's the only that's how I experience stuff. So like I don't really know how else to if that is when I'm having a conversation with someone, that's how I experience it. So I don't really know how it could be anything else.
So I was worried about your question, Julian, because yours was a straightforward meta awareness question. I'm asking about whether I notice myself to have been absorbed. And
I
I don't
don't think
think
I
there's
meant it in that way. I I don't think that at the time you would be noticing yourself being absorbed.
that was what you asked though, and that's why she had trouble answering it, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to rephrase it. Um,
So you can't ask whether she was noticing her absorption or whether the absorption was in experience. I think that's maybe what you said. Is the absorption in your experience? That's not really true. What was in her experience was her friend's conversation, and that was
okay, yeah, yeah. Was or, I asked, was the absorption experienced?
right.
Okay, but
That's the meta awareness question.
yeah, okay. So the friends. Hmm. But this is not like um, it's not a nothing, but with the physical act, the physical thing you're in, maybe occupying a different kind of subconscious state that makes it.
My physical self is not relevant at
Yeah.
this point. Like, there's no part of the location or my physical body that is within my inner experience during this.
Mhm.
No.
Um, and um, yeah, I think I'm good. Actually, I think I'm good. Yeah.
I know, right? Um, yeah.
Number 5.
Number 5.
Well, I've got this went off 7 minutes later. So I've written mid conversation, same thing. Now, interestingly, this went off as I was talking,
Mhm.
um, but the inner experience felt the same. So I was mid sentence, couldn't tell you what the sentence was. It didn't feel relevant. It
Mhm.
literally interrupted me, and if I reflect on what I was doing, this felt exactly the same as the inverse, as when I'm listening. Um, like like my brain is quiet and I'm just doing the thing.
So you're quiet. You're just doing, and it felt the same as the previous two beeps, and I guess also in the vacuuming. If I mean, I don't necessarily know if I want to go back to such an early beep and compare it to something then,
Yeah.
um, but I guess I'll do it anyways. Like, how would you compare that?
Well, I think that this is perhaps where it gets challenging and it can get frustrating for me as well, in that I really feel like this is my experience so often, um, that it's um, I don't know how to describe this nothingness, and that because yeah, so me being mid conversation talking to Millie, did that feel different to when a beep goes off and I was doing the vacuuming?
So can I interrupt this and bring us back to a little bit more to the present here,
Yeah.
and ask about the experience between this beep and the previous beep,
Uh-huh.
so we don't have to get lost in because I seems like we were trailing into not really know what we were talking about in there.
Yeah.
So this experience and the previous experience seems like the same thing, as I understood it.
Yeah.
In the real world, in the previous beep or two, she was talking, and in this beep, you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
But the experience seems exactly the same. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, does that mean that when we had said in the previous beep or two, I was absorbed in Millie's talking? That isn't really true. I was absorbed in the conversation, and at the moment of the beep, it happened to be Millie, and now I'm still absorbed in the conversation, and at the moment beep, it happens to be me. Is that right? That it's
Well, yeah, I don't think there's any distinction for me because I think a distinction would suggest a level of like meta sort of thing. Like, yeah, I'm just engaged in. There's no difference between engaged in conversation or engaged in the listening. Like, it's all the same thing, isn't it?
well, that's what we're trying to find out. That's what's interesting about it.
Yes.
So it would have been reasonable to have understood the previous beep to have been about I'm absorbed in what Millie is saying, but
Mhm.
that apparently is a little bit too broad or too narrow, I guess maybe,
Narrow, yeah.
because it's more I'm absorbed in what we are saying. Now it seems something like that. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I guess, but yes, I suppose so because it doesn't feel any different for me. So that distinction. So yeah, I guess.
So it's not. So what I want to be as clear as we can be here. It's not that at the previous beep my absorption was out there aimed at Millie, and at this beep my absorption is aimed here at me. It's that I'm absorbed, and at that beep Millie was talking, and at this beep I'm talking.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, yeah. There's no difference.
So the
Yeah,
absorption doesn't have a direction to it. It has a
I like
I'm
that distinction.
I'm present here in this conversation.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
I'm still trying to understand this absorption. So, like it's absorption, but it's still not so present in awareness, right?
Yes,
Or so it's absorption. It's present in the sense that nothing else is present.
yes.
No sounds or this or seeing or this or that. What is present is this absorption.
So that whole line of questioning was a meta awareness question, and I think she's denied that. This is not. There's no meta in here.
Wait. Meta as in, so what's present is this absorption. So okay, so what's present is this conversation.
That's right.
Is
Yeah,
okay.
the
It,
presence
it
of
is. It is not present to her that she's absorbed in the conversation. It is present to her that it is
Yeah,
the conversation that is present to her.
the conversation is present.
The absorption is another way of saying the conversation is present.
The conversation, but there's still maybe. Is there something specific about this conversation that makes this kind of absorption special?
no. This is my normal level of absorption.
Okay, maybe that's why I'm defaulting to absorption because I'm thinking of it in terms of like the vacuuming absorption and emailing.
This is my
Um,
present state of being, like that.
yeah. So okay,
Mm.
I think I'm still. I feel like today by getting more details and more different nuances, it's like, and by adding different layers of describing things, it makes it a bit harder in a way because um, I don't know.
You
It's,
seem more confused than ever, Julian, whereas I feel
you
sort of
feel less
less
confused.
confused. So
So that this is the way it is if people are being honest. I think because I think what's happening is Mel's being more honest, and Julian is being confronted with his own presuppositions, which confuse him because he wants it to be a meta awareness kind of a thing, and we're telling him it's not a meta awareness thing, and then but his presuppositions say, well, it's got to be an American or something. I'm not. I don't want to put his
I don't know,
presuppositions into words
I don't
too
know if I
much.
want it to be meta awareness, but I'm still. So what I'm struggling with is, absorption and autopilot.
mm,
And for me, absorption is something that's very present.
That's meta awareness right there. So I don't want to put a word on this, but the struggle that you're having is in the ballpark of there's got to be something mental here. That's that process. It seems like to me.
Something mental. So that experience has to be something mental. Yeah, I mean that's probably it. I probably do have presuppositions about it that I'm trying to understand it.
And what I would say, I think this is a great example of why the iterative process is a really good deal, because the discussion about beep 5 here, Mel started out by saying, well, this is the same as before, but it turned out, well, it was really quite a bit different than before, because this is her talking rather than Millie talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get a chance to refine what our understanding of Mel's experience was, that it wasn't aimed at Millie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy with, by the way, I only got 5 beeps, then it never went off again before midday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy with these samples today because they feel really like I was doing my life, and so they feel like really accurate examples of my inner experience. They feel really authentic, and I enjoyed that it's gone off in a conversation with someone, and that has, to me, felt pretty similar to like other, there's heaps of similarities there. So it's, I don't know, it gives me like like reassurance, but like I think that this is how my inner experience is more often than not. And I challenged that sort of thing today by like doing the sampling in a different version or like a different part of my life, and it still sort of checks out. So it makes me feel like I'm on the right track with trying to explain it. I don't know. I don't think any of those words were helpful, but I feel good about today.
I think that's true. But I wouldn't say that it's better to be doing the sampling in this kinds of contexts. I think it is interesting to do the sampling in a lot of different kinds of contexts. I don't have favorite contexts.
Yeah, it's more just for comparison that I just am curious to try and catch myself about what, is my inner. I think that I'm like this all the time, but all right, well, let's try and catch myself of like when I'm out with friends or when I am alone doing a task or not doing a task, like what is it? So to try and catch that and describe that is really interesting to me.
Well,
Can I rephrase my confusion or presuppositions or whatever?
Yeah.
I guess I'm most confused because a lot of these samples seem like quite a bit more than nothing, but you still compared them to samples that before we had kind of tied to as like a little bit more than nothing,
Yeah, I think that this whole that conundrum is exactly at the core of my inner experience.
Yeah.
Because I think that sort of paradox is exactly my inner experience. Like, is this deeply nothing and there's nothing going on and you're just on this autopilot? Or is it like this deep absorption in the present moment that's somehow different to that? Like, I don't think they're worlds apart, Julian. I sort of think it's
Yeah.
somehow the same thing.
I think that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
And I'm open to like there being paradoxes in consciousness and the fact that like a little bit more than nothing
Yeah.
could somehow also be very absorbing, which seems to be what you're describing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I agree with all that. But what I would say is that the question can't be answered in retrospection. It has to be answered in prospection.
Okay.
So the part of the reason that I interrupted the line of questioning back in the last beep that where I sort of took over in midstream or whatever was it looked to me like we were trying to we were trying to make more of a fairly ill-defined set of experiences that were sort of ill-defined in the past, and I didn't want us to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But going forwards, if she happens to be vacuuming,
Mhm.
and now armed with this discussion about absorption, that at that time in the future, we will be able to say maybe something really quite differentiated between nothing and what we call absorption here.
Mhm.
We can't do it looking backwards because back then, first off, we can't remember, and second off, we're not sure we're talking about the same beep, and third off, we didn't have the practice when that beep occurred to know what we were talking about.
Mhm.
Going forward's a different deal. Going forwards, we might we might find out something, but that requires a sort of a patience. We'll have to find out. Well, now we have raised the issues of nothing, absorption, consumption, whatever, in a deeper way than we could have on previous days. And maybe that'll help us out in the future, and maybe it won't.
Mhm.
Can I
Yeah, I
ask you?
realized.
Oh, sorry, you go. No,
No,
Julian.
you go first.
I was going to completely change the direction, so you go.
Okay, I guess in that direction, I was gonna say I realized a lot of my questions were not the best ones because they were making you, Mel, kind of answer in a way where you were generalizing, or like my experience is usually like this. I
Mhm.
feel like I'm often, which I mean, it's not a bad thing to theorize about your experience. I just think my questions weren't like, I guess I ran out of ways to try to ask about this specific moment or about my own confusions. Um, so yeah, I think that's what I was struggling with for this session.
So the insight is totally important for DES. If you ask a question and you get a generality, then you asked a bad question. That's
Mhm.
Yeah.
just the way it is. Because experience is not about generalities. It is never about generalities.
Mm. And that's challenging because I want to link everything together all the time and come up with some grand thing. So that is an
Every,
ever challenge.
everybody wants to do that.
Yeah. Um. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. Oh, I know. There's a question I want to ask, but I know you're both going to say don't care too bad, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, is what I'm describing very different to how you experience conversation?
Yeah, for me. Should I maybe I'll go. I did a bit of DS where I had the beeper in, and I had a friend and colleague in my master's program interview me, so it wasn't like experienced DES, but I think the samples were they were different. There was more. I can't remember specifics, but I don't know if it's a good scientific practice to talk about your own samples. But I mean, for me, there was a lot of kind of adjusting from one thought to the other. So I was kind of caught in the middle of things where I was almost waiting for something to come. That's what I remember of a lot of my samples. But yeah, I think from conversation samples that I've seen from other people, like everybody is different.
And I would answer it sort of the same way. First, I don't know about my own experience because I have studiously not worn the beepers in the last 40 years. And we can talk about why that is, but I haven't. But I would say that I've got a lot of beeps in conversation, and very often the beeps are beep in conversations. I was carried along by the conversation, and that's it. Whether that's what you're describing here, I'm not exactly sure yet. But there's also a lot of beeps where people are in conversation and they feel like they're waiting for their turn to say something. They want to say something, and it's sort of on the edge, and they're waiting for or they're in conversation and thinking about something entirely different. noise in the next room or whatever. So I think there are lots of different ways of being when people are talking.
But Russ, didn't you write or say somewhere that your students recently kind of convinced you to try out DES as a?
Yeah, I have said that I would not wear the beeper. That's because I didn't really want to know about my own experience. I wanted to know about other people's experience. But I had a lab where I had like 7 students all at the same time, which was sort of unusual for me, and they ganged up on me and said, "You got to wear it." And so I wore the beeper for one time, and it was difficult for me for a variety of different kinds of reasons, but mostly on symbolized thinking and sensory awareness, as I recall. But I'm not sure I'm a good DES participant because it's for a variety of different reasons.
Did you find that wearing it helped you like do your side of things better, or just confused you more?
Well, back in the day, and we're talking 1976, I wore the beeper for a year, nonstop, every day for a year. Back when I was trying to figure out what to do. So I had built the first beeper in 1973, the end of 1973.
Yeah.
And then used it in the way that people are nowadays mostly using beepers, except that I was ahead of them. But giving questionnaires at the moment of beeps, and by the time 1976 rolled around, I was pretty sure I didn't really know what a questionnaire Likert scale 4 on some question meant, and it didn't matter whether you delivered it as a written questionnaire or whether you delivered it as a moment of the beep questionnaire. You still didn't know what you were talking about. And so I spent a year wearing the beeper because I thought the beeper was a good idea, but giving questionnaires wasn't. And so I wore the beeper for a year trying to figure out, well, what might one do if one wasn't going to give questionnaires. But out of that came the beginnings of descriptive experience sampling. It's of course morphed somewhat over the years, but the heart of it was there at the end of that year. And out of that came a conviction that I shouldn't really be interested in my own experience anymore. I don't want to have a favorite. Part of my criticism of most psychology, I guess, is that people want to put their own opinions onto other people and validate their own theories. And so I studiously avoided trying to do that.
Interesting.
Do you think you got stuff out of your year of beeping though?
What?
Probably.
Russ,
Probably.
yeah, a year.
I'm sure I did, but I don't know how to answer the question.
Do you feel like you spent so much time thinking about your own thinking that you went a little bit insane?
Well, I was probably insane before that. So, I think sort of the main thing out of the whole deal is an interest in what is really going on, not in generalities about it. That this moment is different from that moment is different from that moment. This person is different from that person is different from that person. You gotta see this person at a moment. You gotta see Mel at this moment. You gotta see Mel at that moment. You gotta see Mel at that moment. And at the end of the time, after a half a dozen days of those kinds of things, maybe we can say something interesting about Mel. And I think that that we would end up knowing something about Mel that would be tough to find out in any other way. And it's the difference between what I think I wrote, you all may have looked at or whatever, about the diamonds and glass deal. The glass is Mel saying, "This is the way I usually am," And that's interesting enough. It's, like it's a shiny bit of something, and we can talk about that. But it's not as interesting as Mel being at this beep and Mel being at that beep and Mel being at this beep. And then when we accumulate 24 or 36 or whatever diamonds, what Mel is actually like, then we can make a generalization, which I would call a true generalization about Mel based on 36 observations. And that is more interesting than a Mel saying, even honestly enough, well, I'm always, when I'm talking in conversation, I'm listening to the other guy. That's just, it's not possible to understand what Mel means in that situation without having bit by bit by bit by bit.
Can I ask you one other question on this more broad thing? Do you think it's like nature or nurture or some sort of, like, are we genetically like this, or did I become like this?
I don't know the answer to that. I would guess it's some of both, but I don't really know. You would think that psychology would find that a very interesting question, but apparently it doesn't. It should.
I find that very interesting.
You should, because it is interesting. But to know about that, what we would have to do to know the answer to that question, which is an important question, we would have to beep people when they were 10 years old and 12 years old, and we would have to find identical twins and beep them. We have to do all those kinds of studies. Those would be totally interesting studies to do. If you had an identical twin, we should be sampling with the identical twin, particularly if you happen to have been raised in different situations. We could separate those apart. But there's lots of identical twin studies, but they're all questionnaire studies or exterior observation studies, which I find difficult to credit. They're interesting enough. People spend a lot of time trying to track down identical twins, but then they ask some questions which are crap, which is too bad.
Because I think it's really interesting to wonder, like, why we evolved like this, like why the way I experience life could be so vastly different to how somebody else experiences life. Like, in just having started this with you all, this conversation seems to come up with people a lot, and I'm just learning through friends or like anyone, my gosh, how they think. And I understand, like, we take that with a grain of salt because I haven't done the sampling or whatever, but how they think their inner experience is compared to how I think mine is or whatever is so vastly different. It's like we're all speaking different languages. So like what's that about? Like, what evolutionary thing has made that,
I think that's totally the most interesting question in the universe, or one of the most interesting questions in the universe. But the only way you can answer that is to go through the kind of stuff that we're doing now with sort of a lot of people. And so far in our culture, we have not spent the time.
Yeah, true. Because then, like, if you did like age variety or cultural variety, or like, my God, you could get some interesting stuff for us.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry I took us on a tangent, but I just find it very interesting. Okay.
It's a nice tangent. I'm curious because when you first emailed us, Mel, you said that you didn't have any anxiety. And that was a particularity of your experience. And I was like, okay, interesting, but bracket it as we say, and let's look at your samples and not think too much about how you characterize yourself. But I mean, from the samples, I guess I could see why you say something like that. Like, do you understand that characterization of yourself differently now?
Not differently, but I think I can and again, this is all just like I'm not a doctor, but for me, like, I think that it's definitely linked in terms of, the sampling that we've come across has shown that my experience is quite often very quiet and yet this nothingness. And I think that that is directly linked to my lack of anxiety because, I think people that do experience a lot of anxiety would describe their inner experience quite opposite to mine in terms of it's really loud and it's 1,000 places and whatever. So just in a purely not 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 a doctor, not a psychologist sort of linking way, to me, that seems super relevant. So, yeah, I think that this sort of quiet mind that I use as shorthand, I think that's definitely linked to that. And then I just have so many other questions about, like I'm incredibly creative or like all these sorts of things. So my, next layer to all of this in terms of curiosity is about, well, what is and isn't linked, or, I've mentioned before, but like I have a really terrible memory. Like, is that linked to my inner experience? And I think that going back to the anxiety thing, like because I have a really bad memory, I don't, my quiet mind doesn't stew over things that have happened because it's sort of in and out and it's gone, and I'm always this consciously present thing. And then also I don't really project into the future or overthink the future because my mind's quiet. It doesn't do that. Now the other part of that too is whether I have always been like this and I was born like this and this is genetic and or this is some sort of nature nurture thing, or whether at some point I did things that trained this muscle to be quieter. Like these are all sorts of questions that I have about the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's hard. You can get these DS samples and then to extrapolate from that and answer these broader questions is always hard. And the nature nurture stuff is super interesting, but yeah, it's hard to even answer that. But because the only time I've heard descriptions in psychology of people without any anxiety is in terms of psychopaths, which is usually has like a negative connotation, of course. Um, so I
So you're
don't
saying
know.
I'm
It's just very interesting to me. This thing. I mean, I'm a quite anxious guy, so
yeah.
I wouldn't mind a bit of nothingness sometimes.
So I would point out that this line of questioning was what I would call a glass line of questioning,
Yeah,
and
but
you're free to make glass kinds of questionings. But what I want you to know, I want you to be exquisitely clear about the distinction between a glass kind of question and a diamond kind of question. From my point of view, you ask a glass kind of question and I go to sleep because I'm pretty sure Mel is going to give a glass kind of answer, which she did, and she's not going to know what she's talking about, and neither am I. And it's not going to be as interesting as the diamond kind of question. Later on, if we can accumulate enough diamonds, maybe we're going to be able to answer something about that. But in the meantime, it's
so you wouldn't prematurely jump because I do think there's a desire to kind of link and understand ourselves and form broader narratives.
there totally is. But when we do that, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. So
So we can do this again.
yes.